Police dog suddenly stops pilot from boarding. What happens next? Silence is the entire airport. He was a veteran pilot, clean record, about to fly an international route. No one suspected a thing. Everything was perfect, until an old dog from the K9 unit stepped in, standing between the man and the boarding gate. No barking, no growling, just standing there. Like it knew something no human could see. Could pure instinct outsmart all the advanced security tech we rely on? Could a single look from a retiring dog save hundreds of lives? If you believe that sometimes loyalty can see things we can't, stick around, because this story is for you. And don't forget to support us by subscribing to the channel. Every bit of support means the world to us. And it all started with a single pause. In a quiet corner of Clearwater International Airport, where white snow blanketed the runways and announcements echoed nonstop, lay a dog, quietly resting at the feet of her uniformed partner. Her name was Ruby, a German shepherd well past her prime. Once the pride of the K9 unit, Ruby was now mostly known as the one about to retire. Walking beside Ruby was Josiah Bowe, a security officer with nearly a decade by her side. He didn't talk much, rarely smiled, but carried an unshakable trust in his dog, something even he hadn't noticed had slowly faded over time. They used to be the go-to team for high-risk flights, but these days Josiah and Ruby were mostly assigned to routine patrols in the domestic terminal. A soft landing before the official goodbye. That February, the snow fell heavier than usual. Everything at the airport moved to the frantic rhythm of delays and chaos. Under his thick coat, Josiah scanned the crowds, shivering passengers, rushing ground crew, kids glued to their phones trying to escape the endless wait. Ruby walked beside him, quiet as a shadow, head low, the spark of a rookie long gone. "I know. People think your time's up." Josiah bent down, gently brushing her head. She only twitched an ear, barely reacting. Time had taken the edge off a warrior, but no one had dared say Ruby wasn't still worth something. The problem was, no one was really paying attention to find out. Josiah hadn't always been a dog person. Before Ruby, he was a cyber investigation specialist, putting his trust in systems, algorithms, and logic. He joined the K9 unit because they were short-staffed, not because he wanted to. But Ruby changed that, not with cuteness, but with the time she saved his life from a guy hiding a gun in his cargo pants. From then on, they were partners. Not much talking, no need for retraining. Ruby understood Josiah's looks, and Josiah learned to read the slight dip of her head, the low rumble in her throat, or the sudden stop with no obvious cause. But in recent years, the evaluation reports weren't so kind. Ruby had slowed down. Her reactions were no longer up to standard. Josiah started getting those sympathetic looks from coworkers. "Let her retire, Bo. She's earned it," they said, and he started to believe it too. That morning, their assignment was simple. Patrol Corridor D, check the area near the international boarding gates, where most of the time, nothing happened. But something inside Josiah didn't sit right. He didn't say it out loud. Maybe it was the emptiness creeping in, knowing the goodbye was near. He hadn't made plans for a life without the steady sound of his old dog's footsteps beside him. Cold wind whistled against the terminal glass. A Boeing 777 was prepping for departure to Munich, Flight 4719, going through what looked like its final checks. Everything was calm, just like any other day. Ruby showed no signs of anything unusual, but her ears twitched. Josiah looked down and saw that familiar gaze. It wasn't tired. It wasn't the resigned look of someone heading into retirement. It was the look of a warrior, awake once more. He didn't get a chance to ask. Ruby changed direction. No command, no hesitation. And in that split second, Josiah understood something. Some things never go out of date, if you've got the guts to believe in them one more time. Ruby veered sharply. The leash tugged gently in Josiah's hand as she charged toward the crew checkpoint. No more than 20 paces from where they had just been patrolling. It was the far end of Corridor D, a place where everything ran like clockwork. Ground staff checked badges, pilots passed through the ID gate, and then moved on to the prep area before takeoff. No one ever questioned what went on here. But Ruby didn't let it slide. Josiah picked up his pace, eyes scanning the people in the area. Passengers were still dragging suitcases toward gates D18 to D24. Flight 4719 to Munich was cleared for boarding after its final check. Among the flight crew, one man stood out, tall, sharp-looking, walking with purpose. The badge on his collar clearly read, Captain Grant Donovan. Ruby stopped. She stood squarely in the path, just a few steps from Donovan. No barking, no growling. But her whole body was tense. Ears up, eyes locked on the pilot like she was seeing something no one else could sense. "Ruby, come," Josiah said quietly. No response. Donovan hesitated, his blue eyes narrowing in confusion. "Is there a problem, officer?" Before Josiah could answer, Ruby stepped forward, fully blocking the way. Then she barked, loud, sharp, the first bark Josiah had heard from her in weeks. People nearby jumped. A child clung to their mother. "Sorry," Josiah said, holding the leash tight. "K9's reacting. I need you to stop for a moment for a quick check." "A check? I'm the pilot for that flight. You can see that, can't you?" Donovan pointed toward the flight board. His tone was polite, but clearly irritated. A small crowd of passengers paused. A few phones started recording. Ruby kept barking, louder now. Then she moved left, then right, blocking every possible way Donovan might try to slip past. "You need to control your dog. I'm on duty," Donovan said, gripping the strap of his bag, his voice dropping. "Flight 47119 is already behind schedule, and I don't intend to be the reason 200 passengers get even more frustrated." Josiah pressed his radio button. Bow to Supervisor Monroe. K9 unit flagged irregular behavior from flight crew, requesting immediate response. Just minutes later, Supervisor Rachel Monroe came striding in from gate D16, her gray coat flaring behind her, face tight with concern. "What's going on?" she asked, eyes sweeping over the growing crowd. "Ruby's reacting strongly to Captain Donovan," Josiah reported. "No clear reason yet, but she hasn't taken her eyes off him since he came through the checkpoint." Monroe glanced at Donovan. "Is there anything you need to declare, sir?" Donovan took a breath. "I have nothing but valid credentials and a carry-on bag. I'm the lead pilot on an international flight scheduled to depart in 30 minutes, and I'm being held up by an old dog." The comment made Josiah clench his fist. He was about to speak, but Monroe raised a hand to stop him. "Officer Bow," she said, turning to Josiah, "I need you to confirm. Do you believe Ruby's reaction is legitimate, even without physical evidence?" Ruby hadn't barked again, but she hadn't looked away from Donovan either, just stared, silent but heavy as stone. "Yes," Josiah said without hesitation. "I trust her." Monroe nodded. "Then we'll proceed with a standard random screening. Escort Captain Donovan to a private room. We need to clear this up as quickly as possible." Donovan exhaled sharply through his teeth. "I'll cooperate, for safety's sake, right?" He gave a tight smile, but his eyes had gone cold. Ruby led the way, no command needed. The leash was just for show now. Passengers started murmuring. Someone called out, "What's going on? Is there a problem?" Another voice followed with a grumble. "Another pointless K9 check, huh? Delaying the whole flight." Josiah didn't answer. He just watched Ruby, moving slow, steady, toward the screening room next to gate D22. This wasn't how a tired dog moved. This was how a gatekeeper moved. And sometimes, gatekeeping means holding back the whole world, for something you can't yet explain. The door to the screening room closed behind them, shutting out the frustrated whispers from the D concourse. Inside was a sealed, sterile space, cold white walls, a metal table, a few plastic chairs, and LED lights that buzzed just a bit too bright. Ruby sat down right by the door, back straight, ears still up. Her eyes locked onto Captain Grant Donovan like she hadn't looked away since the very first second. Josiah Bow stood to the side, feeling the weight settle hard on his shoulders. He wasn't someone who wavered easily. But this was different. Everything was hanging by a thread. His career, his reputation, and his faith in the four-legged partner who'd walked with him through years no one else would have dared to. "We're detaining the pilot of an international flight because of an old dog's reaction," Monroe said quietly, her voice low but her eyes sharp as a blade. "I know you trust her, Josiah, but if this turns out to be nothing, it all falls on you." Josiah didn't need her to spell it out. He knew exactly what that meant. Paperwork, internal review, suspension, maybe even termination. Donovan sat back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression a mix of irritation and quiet confidence. "I've cooperated, and I'm being treated like a criminal. I'm a licensed pilot with a clean record, no priors, no red flags." Monroe pulled up a copy of his documents on her tablet, eyes scanning quickly through the lines. Everything matched. 16 years of flight experience, no complaints, no major incidents. Donovan had even been commended for safely landing a flight during a storm over Boston. Josiah stayed silent, eyes fixed on Ruby. She wasn't barking. She wasn't growling. But her stare hadn't wavered once. It was a silence that carried weight, a warning in stillness. "Anything else you want to do?" Monroe asked, her voice heavier now. "We've checked the bag, checked his person. The ID is legit. Passengers are getting angry out there. The airline's blowing up our phones. And we've got nothing." Josiah knew all too well. Everything they'd done so far was just box checking. These security protocols only worked when there was a specific lead. Right now, it all came down to one choice: trust the strange behavior of a dog days away from retirement, or trust the flawless logic of a spotless record. He looked at Ruby again, and for a moment, everything came rushing back. The first time they found drugs hidden in a frozen truck, the time she flagged a lighter rigged with a micro-explosive, the night she saved him from a blindside hit during a parking lot brawl. She'd never been wrong. But was this the time that would break that streak? Josiah turned to Monroe. "I want to search his uniform, specifically the collar and shoulder area. Ruby's been locked on that spot ever since he passed the checkpoint." Donovan let out a dry laugh. "That's ridiculous. I wear this uniform every day. It's inspected regularly. It's custom issued for flight crew." Monroe hesitated. "If we do this and find nothing, you know what that means, right?" "I know." Josiah nodded, eyes still on Ruby. "I trust her." The moment stretched, heavy and silent. No one spoke. Ruby didn't move. Then Monroe exhaled. "Call in the tech team. Bring the microscanner. If there's anything off in the stitching, we'll find it." Donovan shot to his feet. "I object to this. This is harassment." "I'll note your objection in the report," Monroe said, her expression unchanged. "But if you truly have nothing to hide, you'll be out of here in 10 minutes with an apology from us." Donovan froze, then sat back down, jaw tight. Josiah stepped over to Ruby and knelt beside her, gently placing his hand on her back. She turned her head and gave his finger a small lick, a simple gesture, but enough for him to know she was still on duty. And he'd made the right call. No one else in that room saw anything suspicious. But Ruby had. And now, so had he. The microscanner arrived less than 10 minutes after Monroe gave the order. A young TSA tech named Gilmore entered with careful hands and a focused stare, moving like he was handling an actual bomb. Captain Grant Donovan stood rigid against the wall, his face tight with restraint. No more words, no sarcastic smiles, no show of cooperation, just silence. But his eyes kept flicking toward Ruby, still sitting by the door, posture still and sharp like a statue, her gaze locked on him like a clasp that wouldn't let go. The uniform was laid flat on the table. Gilmore began scanning each section of fabric: shoulder, sleeve, armpit, waist. No signals, no anomalies. Even the collar, the area Josiah had pointed out, showed nothing on the scanner. No electronic trace, no alert. Monroe crossed her arms. "We're spending too much time chasing a hunch," she murmured, just loud enough for Josiah to hear. "Passengers are being rerouted to another gate. The airline's already asking for a formal report." Josiah stayed quiet, but inside he felt himself sinking. Ruby had never once made him doubt her, but this time, everything was too clean. The tech moved on to Donovan's personal bag. Inside, flight logbook, headset, a light jacket, a small water bottle, gloves, a few protein bars. Nothing unusual. The tablet and phone were scanned and cleared. No tampering, no encryption, no flagged data. "All documents are valid," Monroe announced, as if trying to convince herself. "ID checks out. Pilot's license is current. His name isn't on any agency watch list." Donovan slipped his jacket back on, stepped into the center of the room and spoke, his voice even, cold. "Am I free to return to my duties now?" Monroe looked at Josiah. It wasn't a casual question. It was a direct hit aimed at the trust Josiah was still clinging to. He glanced at Ruby. She still hadn't moved, still locked onto Donovan with that same unwavering stare. Not afraid, not confused, just something fierce and strangely certain. Josiah stepped forward, knelt beside Ruby. She glanced at him for the briefest second, then turned back to Donovan, unshaken. "She hasn't stopped reacting," Josiah said slowly. "I know it's not in the data, not in the scan report, but I've lived with this dog long enough to understand she doesn't give false warnings. She might be slower, she might be old, but she's never been wrong." Monroe stayed silent, her expression caught somewhere between sympathy and warning. You sure this isn't just emotional, Beau? That question landed like a blade, straight into the softest part of his thinking. Donovan lowered his voice, almost a whisper. I get the bond between a handler and their dog, but if we start doubting people like me over just a look, then this system has a serious flaw. Josiah stayed seated. He didn't respond. He had no evidence, no signs of wrongdoing, just a stare, and a feeling not his, Ruby's. He looked toward Monroe, but before he could speak, Ruby made a soft sound, a quiet sniff, barely more than a breath, but enough to freeze the room. She stood, slowly, gently, and began walking toward Donovan. Josiah tightened the leash slightly. Ruby, no growling, no barking, just a calm, focused advance, head low, nose trailing the hem of Donovan's shirt. Monroe and Donovan both instinctively stepped half a pace back. Gilmore, the tech, started to speak, but Josiah held up a hand to stop him. Ruby stopped directly in front of Donovan. Her eyes lifted, not to his face, but to the left collar of his shirt. A beat passed, then another. Ruby sat. No growl, no alert bark like before, just silence. She just sat there, staring at the collar. No one said a word. But in that silence, something shifted. This wasn't a routine check anymore. This wasn't a shot in the dark with an aging dog. Right then, Josiah knew this wasn't the end of something. It was the start. Technician Gilmore set the scanner back on the table, starting to pack up, but Ruby let out a low growl, so quiet an average person might have missed it. But Josiah didn't. It was a signal. Wait, Josiah said sharply, stopping Gilmore mid-move. Rescan the collar. Exactly where Ruby's focused. Gilmore furrowed his brow. I already scanned that twice, inside and out. Nothing came up. Switch to fiber structure analysis mode, Josiah said firmly. I've seen ultra-thin electronics hidden between double-stitched layers. It might not give off a clean signal, but the material density will still show a difference. Monroe looked at Gilmore, then nodded. Do it. If a few more minutes gives us peace of mind, it's worth it. Donovan leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, face like stone. No objections, no cooperation, just watching. But that look, Josiah now saw it differently. It wasn't the look of someone insulted. It was the look of someone calculating, figuring out how much longer they could hold something in. Gilmore rebooted the device, switching to microstructure scan mode. The probe moved slowly along the stitch line on the left collar, right where Ruby had been locked in from the start. There's something odd here, Gilmore muttered, his hand freezing mid-scan. What's odd about it? Monroe asked, stepping in close. Gilmore zoomed in on the image. There's a patch of fiber that's unusually compressed. Higher thread density, concentrated in a 3-inch section near the inside edge of the collar. Easy to miss without this scan mode, nearly invisible to the naked eye. Josiah leaned in to examine the screen, a section of double-stitched fabric. The stitching was clean, uniform, but that stretch of thread, it was tighter than the rest. Could it be a manufacturing error? Or some kind of reinforcement? Monroe asked, though her tone sounded more like she was clinging to one last rational explanation. No, Josiah said, shaking his head. Flight uniforms don't have reinforced stitching there. I've checked crew gear dozens of times. Gilmore bent down to inspect the collar directly. After a moment, he picked up a precision scalpel and carefully began separating the fabric, making sure not to damage the structure. A soft click sounded as the threads gave way. He peeled back the layer, and there it was. What appeared beneath the fabric was a sheet-thin piece of material, barely half the size of a thumb, with a dull silver finish. Its surface was lined with microcircuits and hair-thin copper traces that shimmered under the overhead lights. Holy hell, Gilmore muttered. This isn't reinforcement stitching. This is an ultra-thin electronic device. No antenna, no battery, but this is a circuit. The air in the room turned thick, like everything had stopped moving. Monroe immediately reached for her radio, requesting senior tech team to inspection room B2. We've got a suspicious electronic component embedded in flight crew uniform, possible concealed device. Josiah looked over at Donovan, and for the first time the calm slipped from his face. His breathing quickened, his hands clenched into fists. Ruby was still seated, but her body leaned slightly forward, ready to launch if needed. Explain, Monroe said coldly. What is this, and why is it sewn into your uniform? Donovan said nothing. The silence dragged. Then, slowly, he turned to Josiah. The contempt in his eyes was gone. What replaced it was something else. Calculation. As if, for the first time, he saw the real threat in the room. "You think you just won," Donovan said quietly. "But what you really did was make yourself a target." "We'll find out everything," Monroe replied, eyes locked on him. Donovan didn't argue. He just smiled. Right then, the senior tech team entered. One of them, a federal TSA investigation agent, immediately took possession of the evidence. They powered up a deep scan device and connected the object to a test circuit board. "No broadcast signal," the agent reported, "but the structure matches a trigger bridge circuit. This design, it's not commercial." Josiah turned to Monroe. "We need to search the aircraft." Monroe didn't hesitate, not for a second. "Initiate emergency lockdown on Flight 4719. Evacuate passengers. Get a sweep team and K-9 unit on that plane now." Donovan let out a low chuckle. "It's too late now," Ruby growled. A deep, primal sound. Not a warning this time. Readiness. Josiah didn't look away from Donovan. No more doubt. No more gut feelings. Just a threat. Real, present. And they'd only just peeled back the first layer. The aircraft door had barely opened when the evacuation signal went out. Passengers on Flight 47-9 to Munich, already boarded and seated, were suddenly ordered to disembark immediately from both front and rear exits. No real explanation, just a security issue. And in those few minutes of confusion, Clearwater International slipped into a different kind of tension. Silence so thick, it felt suffocating. Every footstep echoed through the jet bridge leading into the plane. Josiah led the way, Ruby at his side, followed closely by the bomb squad and 2 TSA agents. Their faces were set, hard as steel. No one spoke, just the steady breathing and the low hum of the aircraft systems waiting for a takeoff that would never come. "The area is locked down. Emergency response teams are stationed at the evacuation stairwells. If anything's off, Officer Bowe is the only one cleared to release the K-9 first," came the sharp voice of the tactical commander through the comms. Josiah tightened Ruby's leash. She moved with steady, deliberate steps across the cabin floor, nose pulling in every breath of the cold, conditioned air. She wasn't tense, she wasn't rushing, but her ears twitched constantly, tracking even the smallest sound. The cabin showed no signs of disturbance. Passengers were gone. The carpet lay undisturbed, overhead bins unopened. But that wasn't where the target was. Ruby led them straight to the cockpit. The cockpit door had already been unlocked per Monroe's orders. Both pilot seats sat as expected. Everything looked pristine, sterile, untouched. But Ruby didn't stop. She moved toward the co-pilot's chair on the right, the seat Donovan wouldn't be in, but close enough to reach. She circled it, lowered her head, and slowly sniffed around the cushion. A low growl rumbled in her throat. Then she scraped one paw lightly against the base of the seat. "Here?" Josiah said quietly. The tactical team immediately moved in, detaching the chair according to protocol. Beneath the auxiliary cushion, they uncovered a small compartment, not listed in the official schematics. One of the agents opened his kit, ran a metal scanner across the area. The readings spiked. He carefully began to peel back the inner lining, then looked up at Josiah, squinting. "There's something in here," he said. Layer by layer, the soundproof padding and fabric were peeled back until a black electronic device came into view. Small, flat, but packed with unfamiliar connectors and a micro-sized backup power circuit. In the center was a sync slot, an exact match for the microchip they'd found sewn into Donovan's collar. "Confirmed explosive device," one of the agents said. "Low metal construction, hard to detect. Custom design, likely triggered remotely or via contact circuit." Josiah felt the blood freeze in his neck. "This is the co-pilot's seat," he said slowly. "If it detonates mid-flight, it would blow out the central control system. The captain would lose full command of the aircraft within seconds." The agent nodded, face unreadable, and the cockpit would go into a freefall. No time to issue a mayday. No one said a word. Ruby sat down beneath the co-pilot's seat, still alert but no longer tense. She had found what she came for. Josiah raised a hand to his earpiece. "Bow to Monroe, device confirmed. Location, hidden compartment inside co-pilot's seat. Low metal type, integrated microcontrol circuit, capable of disabling cockpit systems." Monroe responded after a brief pause. "Copy. FBI is en route to take over. Donovan remains in custody. Do you need anything else?" Josiah looked at Ruby. She looked back. Her eyes, aged, yes, but still sharp, still steel. No words needed. He gave a quiet nod. I need an official report confirming this dog just saved 221 people from disaster. You'll get it, Monroe replied. The whole world will know. Josiah sat beside Ruby, gently stroking the back of her neck. She nudged her head into his hand for the first time all day, letting herself relax. One mission, one instinct, one feeling no system could replicate. And once again, she was right. Outside, the snow had started falling again. But inside the cockpit, no one felt cold anymore, because they had all just been spared by an old dog no one believed in anymore, except for the one man who always did. In interrogation room 3, harsh white light beamed down on a metal table, making the air feel even heavier. Captain Grant Donovan sat motionless, wrists cuffed to the chair. The cool, confident expression he wore in uniform was gone. His hair was disheveled. Sweat glistened on his temples. The FBI had arrived. Leading the task force was Federal Agent Matthew Klein, aviation terrorism specialist. He didn't offer a greeting, didn't waste time. He dropped a thick folder on the table, flipping it open to the very first page, an Interpol ID photo. You're not Grant Donovan, Klein said, voice low, steady, and final. Your real name is Lucas Reiner, German national, vanished in Turkey in 2020 after suspected links to the extremist group Phoenix Dawn. Since then, not a single system has picked you up, until today. Donovan, or rather Reiner, didn't respond right away. He just curled one corner of his mouth, eyes now unable to hide the exhaustion. New identity, falsified credentials, a spotless flight record for 5 straight years. Klein continued. Not a single slip-up. He paused, until you were stopped by an old dog. Reiner's expression twitched. For the first time, something real passed across his face. Bitterness, contempt, the sour taste of a failure he hadn't prepared for. We've recovered the explosive device from the cockpit, Klein said. Circuit matches the microchip hidden in your collar. That information is already being verified at headquarters in D.C. You have anything you want to say? Silence. Reiner lowered his head slightly, as if in thought. One hand twitched. It was subtle, but Klein stepped back half a pace and gave a sharp nod to the officer behind him. He's prepping for suicide. The officers moved instantly. 2 of them lunged in, pinning Reiner to the chair. One forced his shoulders down, the other jammed a mouth spreader between his teeth, reaching in and extracting a half-dissolved white capsule from beneath his tongue. Cyanide, the second officer confirmed. Standard issue. 10 more seconds, we'd have lost him. Reiner didn't resist. After they cuffed both wrists and ankles to the chair, he simply shut his eyes, breathing hard, like someone furious not at being caught, but at losing control of how the story ended. We know there are 2 more flights in your network's crosshairs, Klein said. One from Frankfurt, the other from Cairo, both within the next 36 hours. And you're going to give us the name behind this entire operation. Reiner opened his eyes. His voice was raspy, but clear. They won't stop. Just because I got caught, that's what you don't understand. Then help me understand, Klein replied coldly. If not for yourself, then at least for the innocent people you nearly killed today. Reiner didn't answer, but something in his eyes had shifted. The control was gone, the confidence gone. He wasn't leading anymore, he was being led. From the observation room behind the one-way glass, Josiah Bowe watched everything. He said nothing. Just stood there, arms crossed, eyes locked on the man in the chair. The terrorist who slipped past every security system, even the FBI, but couldn't get past one instinct. Ruby's. Monroe stepped up beside him. We just got confirmation. Lucas Reiner's ID matches an old file from Europe's most wanted terror list. He was a tech engineer. That explains how he built the microchip, how he slipped past every scanner. Josiah nodded slowly, but he didn't get past Ruby. Monroe looked at him. You realize today wasn't just about saving one flight. You stopped what could have been a chain of attacks, something that might have crippled the entire international aviation grid. We were just doing our job, Josiah said. One man, and one dog who wasn't ready to retire. Behind the glass, Reiner lowered his head again. But this time, he knew. The control was gone for good. He didn't lose because of a technical mistake. He lost because of the one thing he couldn't program, couldn't fake, and couldn't calculate the odds against. The instinct of a loyal dog. The interrogations stretched through the night. Reiner, stripped of his last attempt to control the outcome, finally began to talk. Not out of remorse, but because he now understood his life only held value if it came with intel. "We call ourselves Emberline," he said, voice steady, eyes distant. "Not an organization, not an army. We're an idea. We're patience. We don't bomb markets. We strike the veins of the world, its airways." Klein sat across from him, jotting every word. Agent Monroe leaned quietly against the wall, and in the back of the room, Josiah stood watch. Silent, still, eyes fixed on Reiner. "I'm one of three," Reiner went on. "3 operatives, 3 flights, 3 continents, within 48 hours. We're not here to destroy the entire aviation system, only to prove it can be destroyed anytime." "There are 2 more?" Klein asked. "They don't know each other. I don't know their names," Reiner said, calm and matter-of-fact. "Emberline doesn't operate like a pyramid. We're a layered, anonymous network, fluid, constantly shifting. I was given my role, nothing more." "What's the next flight?" Klein pressed. Reiner paused, then replied, "Frankfurt to Toronto, an A330, scheduled for tomorrow night." "Name of the pilot?" "I don't know," he said, shaking his head. "I only knew the target and the time. If I failed, a disconnect signal goes out. The others will be triggered early." Monroe's brow furrowed. "They're trying to bait us, force a wrong move?" "No," Reiner replied, eyes flashing. "They want you to know. Emberline doesn't need to succeed. They only need to plant fear." Behind the glass, Josiah's voice cut through, soft but firm, and Ruby disrupted that entire system with a single look. Monroe glanced at him. "Not just disrupted. She put us ahead. We're not reacting anymore. We're moving first." Klein stepped away from the table, joining Monroe and Josiah in the hallway. His tone was quick and sharp. "We've issued emergency alerts to Frankfurt and Toronto. Crew manifests are being cross-checked. We need 6 hours to verify every name." "What about the 3rd flight?" Monroe asked. "Still unknown," Klein said. "All Reiner had was a rough detail. A flight from North Africa to the US. They're blind to each other, built that way to protect the chain." Josiah stayed quiet, gently running his hand along Ruby's back. She was resting at the end of the hallway, eyes still open, still alert, as if she hadn't yet been given permission to sleep. "You know," Klein said, turning to Josiah, "every layer of security we've built has a hole in it. People learn to game the rules, fake the documents, beat the systems. But Ruby? Ruby doesn't have a hole. She can't be fooled." Josiah nodded. "Because she doesn't think in logic. She feels, and she reacts. Not because of policy, not because of a manual, just instinct. And that instinct," Monroe added, "just saved hundreds of lives. Maybe thousands if all 3 flights had gone down midair." The 3 of them looked through the glass, where Reiner sat slumped, alone in that white interrogation room. No one was forcing him to talk. He'd already lost. From the moment an old dog refused to let him board that plane. Emberline didn't end here. But the first link had broken. And it broke because of something they never accounted for. The trust between one man and a dog they thought was past her prime. The sky was pale, caught in that strange in-between when the snow hasn't melted, and the light can't decide if it's night or dawn. Faint, yellow beams from the airport's west maintenance sector stretched across the snow, casting an eerie glow. Not quite morning, not quite dark. Technical Bay 7, an old, seldom-used building tucked far from the passenger terminals, was meant to be nothing more than storage for outdated electronics and aircraft parts. But according to Reiner's confession, this was where Emberline had placed one of their coordinators, a mid-level handler, likely scrambling to cover tracks now that the operation was exposed. At 5:42 a.m., the tactical team was in position, 4 sides locked down around the old building. Josiah Bowe stood at point, Ruby by his side. She wore light body armor and chemical-resistant booties, standard protocol for high-level counterterrorism ops. Monroe's voice came over the radio. "Breach all sides. K9 leads the sweep. If you locate any suspicious electronics, do not touch. Preserve the scene." The metal door blasted open with a muffled charge. Teams moved fast through the tight corridors, flashlight beams sweeping the ceilings and walls in tight, disciplined arcs. No voices, no resistance. But Ruby's pace shifted. She was no longer patrolling. She was tracking. Her nose stayed low to the floor, ears pricked, body lowered in full-on pursuit mode. "She's on something," Josiah said quietly, keeping close as Ruby veered left into a small room at the end of the hallway. Inside, rows of cabinets filled with electronic parts and a 3D printer still warm, plastic filament mid-feed, partially melted. Ruby stopped in front of a metal cabinet with a combination lock. She barked once. Short, sharp, certain. The tech team moved in with a portable lock breaker. Click. The door popped open. Inside wasn't just spare hardware. It was a partially assembled explosive device hidden in a technician's tool case, nearly complete. No timer or trigger circuit yet, one of the techs reported. Power lines still disconnected, but the design matches, 95% identical to the device from Flight 4719. "We got here in time," Josiah said, eyes still on Ruby, who hadn't relaxed for a second. She didn't stop there. She kept moving, tracing along the back wall, then suddenly let out a low growl, pawing at a section of cheap plywood slapped over the wall like a last-minute cover-up. Josiah stepped forward with the breaching team. They pried off the wooden panel, and behind it, embedded in the wall, was a safe. It wasn't listed in any blueprint of the facility. They cracked it open, and everyone froze. Inside, an encrypted data drive, an offline mini-computer, and over 200 gigabytes of Emberline's internal material. Attack schematics, operatives' travel routes, explosive device blueprints, and detailed maps of major international airports, complete with blind spot analyses of their security systems. "This isn't a supply cache anymore," Monroe said, her voice slow and steady through the radio. "This is a command node, a war room." One TSA agent moved to take Ruby outside for rest, but she didn't budge. Not until Josiah knelt, gently touched her head, and whispered, "It's okay, Ruby. You've done your part." As the transport truck carrying the recovered data and devices pulled away from the maintenance bay, the sun crested over the snow-covered runway. The light wasn't warm, but it was clear. And in that clarity, the team knew they'd just sealed off a gateway, one once used to plan terror from the skies. It all began because one dog refused to step aside. And now, because of her, the final raid had ended, before the enemy ever had the chance to act. A week later, the snow in Clearwater began to melt. The crisp white frost turned to gray, trickling into the grooves along the runway, as if trying to wash away everything that had just unfolded. A plot, an investigation, and a quiet war fought in the heart of an airport no one ever thought to fear. In a modest hall at the U.S. Transportation Security Administration, light poured down on a reserved front row. Some wore suits, others uniforms. And in the middle of them all, quiet but impossible to miss, sat a German shepherd named Ruby, a small medal hanging from her collar engraved with the words, "For instincts that no system could replicate." Josiah Bowe stepped up to the podium to receive his commendation, but his eyes searched only for Ruby. Seated at the front, ears perked, still holding the posture of an on-duty K9. "We didn't uncover that plot through artificial intelligence," he said, voice steady and low. "Not through algorithms, not with advanced tech. We found it through trust, through instinct, through a dog people thought was past her prime." The room was completely still. There are things we, as humans, no matter how smart, simply can't sense. But Ruby can. And that day, she didn't just save a plane. She forced the world to remember something we keep forgetting. Sometimes, to stop something terrible from happening, you just have to listen to what seems easiest to ignore. A wave of applause filled the hall. No one stood, but every person leaned forward, eyes fixed on Ruby, a hero with no uniform, no microphone, and no need to defend her actions. Ruby didn't know what honor meant. She simply turned her head toward Josiah, her partner through all those quiet years at the airport, and wagged her tail. Just once. But it was enough to bring tears to the eyes of everyone watching. Never underestimate the power of loyalty, instinct, and trust. In a world increasingly run by tech and data, it's the so-called animal instincts that just might be the link humans are starting to forget, and the one we can't afford to lose. A dog saw what no scanner could detect, and because of that, hundreds of lives made it home safely. Not because we were smart, but because we listened to the simplest instinct of a loyal creature. If you believe every dog has a reason behind their reaction, hit subscribe on Dog Stories so you don't miss more powerful, true stories like Ruby's. Have you ever witnessed a moment of magic from a dog? Share it with us in the comments. Your story just might be the next one the world hears. We'll see you in the next story.